Is this thing on? Hello? Oh, it is on. Hello, and welcome to. I'm not even sure what this is. I'm doing a little bit of an experiment. As you can tell, you can see me and not just hear me for a change. Substack has had the ability to do video for some time, and I've done videos on other people's feeds, but I felt like it was time for me to try it myself. So let me try this again in a more professional state. Hello, and welcome to Maurice Carlos Ruffins, Sitting in Silence. No theme music yet. I can't afford that. I hope you're all doing well out there. Um, this was inspired by a few things. As I mentioned, I have friends who are other creators on Substack, writers and like who have done videos, and I've done appearances on their shows. And I thought it was time to try my own. But I think what really got me going today was this is a Saturday when I'm recording this, and as many of you know, I am not only a writer, but I'm also a professor. And I'm sometimes invited to talk to incoming students. And so this morning, I talked to some students at my home institution, LSU, who are what they call pre-scholars. These are the ones who had to sort of nail down some classes before they got accepted officially. And I was one of the panelists. I got to give a presentation and answer questions. And I don't know, it's something about, you know, talking to young people who are so inspired to start their future got me to thinking about my own journey, and it brings me back to where I was when I started Sitting in Silence back in 2022, which was just me being a writer, having things to say, wanting to discuss or talk and write about the life of an author and the craft of it as well. So that's all brought me here today. And, also I was already dressed up. So I felt like, you know what, I might as well just, use the fit, right? I mean, to be perfectly honest. So here I am. And so I feel like today on this first episode, I'll cover three basics. I will um, give a quick recitation of who I am for those of you who are new to Sitting in Silence. I will talk a bit about craft and a bit about the real foundation of Sitting in Silence. People that like the newsletter and like the podcast, um, like the fact that I'm not afraid to be inspirational, to sort of delve into that part of this experience, which is about time and the movement of time, about how we have a finite amount of time and resources to live our dreams. And so, as somebody who is doing exactly that, living my dream, I'm here to discuss that as well. So, let me back up for a second and say who I am. Who am I? Well, I am Maurice Carlos Ruffin. I am a native New Orleanian, so I'm a Southerner. I am African American, and I'm also the author of several books. And so I wasn't even sure how to stage today. I've done other visual things in the past on IG, for example, where I have like a sort of background with books. And I know that on places like TikTok, for example, the algorithm will like you better if you have like a bunch of books like on a shelf. Well, I'm a bit of a nonconformist. I don't like to do what everybody else is doing. So I figured I'd do this. And so as you can see, uh, I feel like a bit like one of those weather people, weatherman, weather lady, looking, pointing at the, on Monday, it's going to be 78 degrees with 90% humidity. It's kind of like that, but it is pretty cool, right? So I've written three books, and the books have several versions of them, several editions of them. This is actually not all of the books. I couldn't quite fit everything up here, but I'll just give you a quick rundown of what I have up here. So the first book I have, and it's cool. It's like no technology. It's no blue screen or anything. My first book is We Cast a Shadow. It came out in hardcover in 2019. It's my first book baby. I'm very happy about the book because it's very funny and darkly comedic, but it also covers a lot of very deep topics, including family and living a life that means something, as well as racism in America. It's set in the future. It's a book that got nominated for 9 prizes, so it did pretty well out there in the sort of critical field. Over here is actually the paperback version, so that's the hardcover version, which is kind of hard to get nowadays, and paperback version of it, right? Now, my second book is a collection of short stories, and I know it's kind of far in the background here, but this is my short story collection that came out in 2021, and this collection is called The Ones Who Don't Say They Love You. This is the hardcover and the paperback, and this is if my first book was like my love letter to like my younger self, like my teen and 20s self, then the collections They are a love letter to my hometown. It's 19 stories about New Orleans, about the sort of place behind the place. Everybody knows New Orleans, but like other adored cities, Paris or New York or Tokyo or Las Vegas, there's a kind of fantasy version of it and a real version of it. So my idea was to write stories about people that are really from that place, from my hometown, and people from New Orleans seem to like it and respect the work. It gives me great pleasure to have written a book that my folks are into. It's cool to be a writer. Look, none of us become writers to be famous, not at all. I mean, if you're in this for that, you're in the wrong field. But it is nice that was the book where I'll be walking around town. People kind of go, "Hey, isn't that writer guy Maurice?" Like at a gas station, that kind of thing. So that's a real thing as well. So first book 2019, second book 2021 came out in the late early pandemic era. Now my third book came out about a year ago, and these are different editions, but I have a close-up version here. It's The American Daughters. Came out in February of 2014. Historical novel about a bunch of black ladies fighting against slavery. It's a lot of fun. It's got a lot of interesting details and a lot of, amazing characters. In my mind, they were kind of like a superhero team of black girls and women, um, based on my own ancestors. And I guess it worked because this is my first bestseller, and they've done other editions of it, including, let's see what we have here. This is the library edition, which is really nice. Now, I remember being a kid myself and going to the library where I volunteered. And, sometimes they have those special editions that are like the extra thick cover with the large print. Well, that's one of those right there. There's also a British version that came out almost a year ago now, which I'm very proud of, with that sort of Monty Python collage look to it. As well as that, there's also the paperback version that's out, and so that's not pictured. And there's also a Turkish edition of my first book that's not pictured as well. So, that's who I am. I am an author who also teaches. My main gig is at LSU, where I've been now since 2019. I'm also well known as a sort of traveling educator. I have taught at many programs around the country over the past several years, including at places like Kenyon College, at Randolph over in Virginia with the Lower SMFA program. I've been there for several years. I have appeared at Swanee and also Red Loaf in Vermont. And it's really cool for me because years and years ago, I was the kind of person going to those festivals and conferences to learn, and now I'm going to those places to teach. And it's always just very nice to see people who are engaged in trying to live their dream. And so I do a lot of that kind of work too, as well as my online classes through Shipman Agency, where I cover many topics. I did one last week on how to do a novel. You can find those at shipmanagency.com. Shipman, Shipman. Right. So I thought beyond that part of me, which is the writer and the teacher, I thought I'd cover just a little bit of craft, getting started, kind of getting warmed up here in my first video. And I felt like I would go back to some of the topics that were most requested and that I have covered in other formats. So, I've done newsletters, I've done podcasts about some of this stuff, but I felt like this would be a good place to start here. So I think that in miniature, I will cover the idea of writing about the self, which is memoir. I'll cover a little bit as well about storytelling in the sort of general idea of storytelling, and maybe more specifically about things like keeping your head up, and that's the sort of inspirational part of today's talk. So first of all, why do I want to go to memoir? Well, it's fresh in my mind. About a week or two ago, so let me clarify something. So I do my Substack, which if you don't know much about Substack, even though you're seeing me right now, Substack is a platform that I find very pleasurable to work on because, unlike certain formats which force you to be very, very, very succinct, like Twitter back in the old days, or TikTok for the most part, it's more expansive, and I can deliver things in ways that I think makes most sense for most people. So, for example, the video you're seeing right now is a free video. If you have access to Substack, either through the internet or through the app, You can see what I'm doing right now. And the vast majority of what I post or write, whether it be my essays or the podcast or this video, are free to the public. Substack also allows us to have a sort of patron feed, and that is the paid version. And so, in the paid version, which I do both as a podcast and as a newsletter, there's that area over there. And the reason why I do that is because there's only so much time in a day, and so I have to decide how to allocate that time. But one of the perks for people who do the patron versions, they can actually request topics. And so a few weeks ago, somebody asked me to address in the podcast form memoir writing. And so if you look on my feed, you'll see it's the one I think I called it something to the effect of memoir is the hardest writing there is, right? And in that one, maybe I did it as a newsletter. I should know this, but I don't quite recall. In any event, I talk in that a bit about how people take for granted how difficult it is to present one's own life in a story format, in a memoir, in a book. And the reason why that is for several reasons. I won't cover all the same ground, but I'll just say this. One of the most difficult things is knowing thyself. If I gave you an offer that you couldn't refuse, and the offer was, I'm going to guarantee you'll publish a book, either memoir or fiction, within the next couple of years. But first, what you must do is you must go out into the people the community of people your relatives and loved ones and friends, and ask each one of them over the course of a half hour, explain all your faults and all the things about you that they find annoying or off-putting or problematic. Most of us couldn't accept that mission, like Mission Impossible. If you choose to accept it, you wouldn't accept it because it's difficult. And while I think that often in memoir writing, one of the aspects of it is that there is this bit of score settling that takes place. Whether it be you're going to look at the people in your life when you were a child or very young, maybe your parents, maybe a mother, maybe a father, who knows, and you're going to show how messed up they were and show how innocent you were. And while there is some generalized truth in that, it's not always the thing people want to engage with because it can feel, oh, I don't know, like the writer has an axe to grind. They're only saying this because they are in pain and they want to show how good they are and how bad somebody else is. And again, that can work pretty well sometimes, but generally speaking, people want some nuance and complexity. I think I gave the example before. There's this old movie from the late 70s, I think. It's called Mommy Dearest. It's pretty well known amongst people of a certain age. Let's say if you're over 35 or so. And for those who don't know what it is, I have stats that shows me what kind of people like to partake in sitting in silence. I know that a bunch of you are based in New York, a bunch of you are based in California. I think the average age is probably about that 34 to 45 demographic, with a few people older and a few people younger. But if you don't know what that is, Mommy Dearest is a movie. I think the actress is Joan Crawford. Is that right? I may be saying that wrong. You can look it up on IMDb or whatever like that. But it's based on a real book by a woman whose mother was an actress who, in the mother-daughter relationship, was quite cruel and petty. And there's all these scenes where the mother is just like giving the daughter the worst time over things like using wire hangers to hang the clothes up instead of like those special satin hangers. And I saw that film as a small child. I thought it was interesting and fine. But one of the criticisms of that story is that it doesn't feel like it's honest. And that, yes, there are people in our lives who can be quite terrible, but the way that they treated us is not their entire story. And while it's totally true that if people wanted to have fair representations of who they were in your story, they should have been better to you. That is totally true, but it's also quite boring. And I've encountered lots of writing by people I've worked with over the years where, again, it's this sort of score setting. Often the main character is quite young. There's a parent who comes off as quite evil, and there's a flatness to the writing that people have a hard time engaging with. And so I'm saying all this to say that, sure, it's okay to have a true story in which there's a major antagonist who is antagonizing you as the main person in the piece. But we do want some complexity from all of the various people, including yourself. And so if everything in the story is the fault of that other person, and you as the character is coming off as this sort of angelic figure who had done no wrong, well, then people will probably check out pretty fast. And so I'm not saying that I have like again, I'm not that young. So I'm not saying I have like a shelf somewhere in my space here, my writing space, with a bunch of old VHS cassettes where I asked everybody to explain what my problems are. And I just like look at those things over and over again. But I have had I'll say the pleasure of, as some people in my community might say, being read for filth, where they'll say, Maurice Ruffin, you're messed up, and here's why you're messed up. Now, you can get that also through things like therapy, for example, which can be a bit less traumatic. Although, therapists famously are known for having not only a soft touch, but sometimes an enabler's touch, where again, it's like, oh, you're okay as you are. Just keep doing what you're doing. But I can tell you that having the life experience of meeting people, seeing their worst sides, and then kind of understanding their point of view, and then seeing myself, and I love myself, and then seeing where I'm kind of messed up sometimes has allowed me to be a writer who is better able to engage with these things on the page. And so I would just say to people out there, as you're writing memoirs, recall that your mission is not necessarily to score settle, although selling scores can be quite pleasurable even to the reader, but to give a full account of who we are and where we've come from, and to give everybody their due. Some of the worst people I have heard about who have appeared in nonfiction, again, not that their opinion is the most important thing here, but I've heard them say, and I've read about this in various ways, where they were not that offended to be shown as somebody who, for example, was an addict or abusive or you name it, because at least in those tellings, their humanity was shown. And the story I think I told in my other iteration of this memoir talk is something that is important to me, which is that I recall being a student at the University of New Orleans writing program, and I was writing nonfiction in the class, and I remember that my professor, a wonderful man named Randy Bates, who had the softest touch possible. He would never say anything rude or mean-spirited. He wouldn't even try and push you very much. But I remember like turning in something in that class, and he told me after one of the classes, Maurice, I can tell you're not really digging in as a writer yet. I'm like, well, what do you mean, Randy? And he's just like, write something that means something to you. And so I go back and I write this piece that was really terrifying to write. Even to this day, it's probably the most terrifying thing I tried to write. And I can say now, because it's out in the world, it's been out in the world now for over a decade, if not, almost 15 years. Now, I even get nervous thinking about it right now, but basically the piece was this. It was a piece about me and my mother. I'm young at the time, maybe 14 or 15 years old. And at that time, she had a drinking issue, pretty big problem in her life and the family's life. And one day she picks me up from school. I'm probably a freshman or sophomore, somewhere in that range. And, as I say in the story that I published, she is clearly inebriated, and we get into a hit and run accident. And it's a serious thing. I mean, we're charging along. We blow through a intersection and hit somebody else. And then, I think out of sheer fight or flight, she decides to drive off. So we do that. And so we drive across town, and I can see in the rearview mirror we're being followed by a good Samaritan who's, tracking us down, got our license plate. It was the whole thing. The cops show up. A very intense moment, as you might imagine. And so I wrote this as a nonfiction story. And I'm not even sure what the response was in the class. I don't know if I actually presented it to my fellow students, but I got the story published. And of all things, the strangest place. You may recall that there was a magazine called Highlights that often appeared in dentist office for children. So in this magazine, you would have these these little stories. You'd have these little games, and there was Goofus and Gallant was one of the well-known sort of stories inside of that. And so this story appeared not in the same magazine, but in a very similar one. It was called Cricket, I think, or it was called Cicada. That's what it was called, Cicada magazine. And so I got this story published, and then I decided, I didn't run it past my mama first before I published it, but I should show it to her, which was like maybe not the best idea, but I had to do it. And so I brought the story. I brought the story to her, and I remember clammy hands, sweaty forehead. I go to visit her, and I just go, "Ma, you got to read this." And it was one of my very first published stories. Actually, it was probably like my third or fourth published anything, as an adult. And so I gave it to her. I'm sitting in the room. I think she's on her bed. I'm sitting in a chair across from her. I'm just like trying to not stare too much. And my heart is beating so fast. I'm thinking she is going to disown me for telling this story about this, difficult time in our lives. And I remember thinking, well, if I get disowned by her, it was a nice run having a mother. Um, and I should have known better, because one thing about her is that she has always been a very honest person. She's got some boundaries where there's things where she's like, I shouldn't say this to a young person, to my sons or something like that. But she's a very honest person. So she reads the story and she looks up, and all she says initially is, because we were driving in the car, she says, that car was blue, not silver. The car was blue, not silver. And I remember having this mixture of this rush of emotions of like relief, and also laughing at myself, laughing at her because she's a very funny person. And it wasn't even a problem. I think, and also what was most wonderful about that experience is it actually opened the door for us to talk more about that time in our lives. And we did over the next few months and years. And I think it made us better towards each other. So I'm just saying that as it comes to things like memoir, it's important for you as a writer to be honest about yourself, honest about your entire life in the world that you're living. And I think that often pays off in the long run. Now, I mentioned I cover a little bit of craft today, so I'll do some of that. And I'll cover one of my favorite sort of broader topics, which is how to tell compelling stories. And in talking about this briefly, I'll just say that most of us writers, and I'm somebody at this point has had, dozens, if not hundreds of students that I work with. And you see oftentimes with writers who are trying to find their feet, their sea legs, like Bambi in the old cartoon by Disney, kind of wobbly at first. There are these tendencies that are true amongst most writers. And it doesn't matter like your age, because people can start writing in earnest when they're a bit older. I mean, look, I myself, I was writing when I was young, but I didn't take it seriously until I was a bit older. I didn't go to grad school for writing until I was 33 years old, my Jesus year, right? And I didn't publish that first book until I was 41 years old. I'm only 42 now, and I'm kidding. But it took me a while to get to embrace myself as an author. So it doesn't matter how old you are, but what you will see is a couple of things. One, people who are just getting started will often write just for the pleasure of writing, and then share that writing and think that you'll be pleased by it as well. So there's something that happens to a lot of us where you're writing and you're doing like a lot of description about like the setting and how the character's thinking, and the backstory and all this kind of stuff. And they're kind of wandering around, they're kind of observing what's happening. And I think that is a stage that writers go through when we embrace the pleasure of writing. There's nothing wrong with that. And some writers made their careers out of that kind of writing. Charles Dickens, for example. Most of us who have a Western education probably read some Dickens in high school, certainly by college. So whether it's something like Bleak House or Tale of Two Cities, or any of those books that are such classics, which I love myself. I actually think Dickens is like a top 10 author for me. But that's a very old style where you can start a book off with 15 straight pages describing what downtown London looks like and feels like. Because back then there was no television, there was no radio, surely there was no internet, and so people liked the idea, if they were not from London, of learning like what it was like in this part of where Dickens was living and writing, right? But that was a long time ago. That was like 130, 150 years ago now. And so while it's important for you as a writer to have that phase, to develop yourself, to be detail oriented and to live in that detail, readers rarely need that level of detail nowadays, especially in the age of the internet, of television, TikTok. Related to that is also this idea of the main character. And as I have heard said by Steve Almond, he's a writer who teaches around the country quite often. He says, who do I like and what do they like? And it's this idea of like, get to it, get to the character as fast as you can. And sometimes what I will see, actually not sometimes, a lot of the time, you have a character who is just kind of like in a moment of their life where they're feeling kind of verklempt, they're feeling kind of anxious about life. And for 5 or 10 pages, they will lay out like who they are, where they're from, who their people are, what's bothering them. And while all those things are important to the character and the story, often those things are things that you should know and deploy them judiciously, but should not be front loaded in the writing. And so, to give a simple prescription for that, you want to start fast. Start the story with a character in a moment of physical activity where they're in trouble and they're responding to it. I'm not saying that they should be like those really old stories. I think it was called Hairbreadth Harry. This hero who would, I think he has like a girlfriend or like a lady he has a crush on, but she's captured by this villain who has like a twirly mustache. This is where that cliche comes from. And he would like tie her, like put her on a railroad track. I'm not saying like something like that, but definitely you want to have the character in a moment where they have to react to what's happening in the world. So instead of having the character, sitting in her bed thinking about the last 5 years of her life, put her in the office surrounded by colleagues, perhaps who don't like her that much. And she can see that they're about to, fire her or something like that. Or she's a doctor and she's in the ER and she's using an unusual technique to try and save a life, but it fails. Or she's a teenager and she has just been embarrassed on the stage in front of the entire student body. Look, I can manufacture these all day like I'm AI. AI can do this, but I can do it because I'm a writer. AI is taken from us, not vice versa. My point is, have the character in motion. We say sometimes start the story in media res, start the story in the middle, because people know stories, and so we're okay with getting to the heart of the matter. This is the reason why even in these superhero films, which I'm a big fan of actually, there's been a trend recently. So, maybe you're one of these people who went to see all the MCU films. Maybe you're a DC person. Maybe you don't know anything about it. Maybe you're totally against this stuff. But you'll notice that in the first 15 to 20 years of the 21st century, you might see one of these films, and the first 30 minutes of the film is giving the hero's origin story. So it's Peter Parker, who's bitten by a radioactive spider, and now learns that he's super strong and can like climb walls by sticking his hands to the walls. Or maybe it's the Avengers, and we see kind of how they all came together because Nick Fury, played by Samuel L. Jackson, enlists them to fight against this Loki character. Or maybe it's Batman, and for the 50th time, we're going to see young Bruce Wayne's parents take him to see some show, and they get shot outside the theater by this mysterious guy, and this creates the trauma that leads to Bruce Wayne becoming Batman. But in the last couple of years, I've noticed you don't get the backstories. So even yesterday, I saw a film called Fantastic Four. Maybe you know them, maybe not. Whether it's for you or not, I enjoyed the film, but there's no backstory, or there's a quick montage explaining kind of where they came from, and then on to the show. Same for what else I see recently, the Superman film, the new one, starring David Cornsweet. There's a little bit of backstory, like in the opening credits, and then it's off to the races. Same thing in, I think, in writing in general. Just get us into it. If a little bit later on you want to explain like how they got to where they're at, totally fine. So that's my pieces about a memoir and uh, about craft. Getting stories started. Lastly, I just want to give you something that I like to share, and I shared it this morning with my pre-scholar charges at LSU, and a few of the questions from the students, you can sort of see it in their faces, was kind of unasked, but it was kind of like, how do you become what you want to be? And I'll just say that people who are creative, people who are writers, we are born writers. We know that we're writers from very early on. Look, if you're not a writer, you don't think about writing. It's really that simple. If you were born to be a gymnast, or a pastor, or an accountant, accountants do not dream about writing. Whereas every writer I know, there's these telltale signs that they were meant to be writing things. One question I will often ask when I'm teaching a class is, I'll start off on the very first day and I'll say, okay, by show of hands, if you kept a journal growing up, raise your hand. And usually about half of people, if not more, will raise their hand. Maybe like 80% will raise their hand. That's a telltale sign that you have this, I think the Greek words like logophilia or something like this, like the love of the word. You just can't help yourself, or you've had this big idea in your mind for years now. You just want to like sit down one day and commit to writing it out, but you haven't had time because you're raising a family, or you've got a busy career, or you lack self-confidence. But what I can tell you today, my friends, is something that I have learned in my life, and it's because I've seen it in my life, but also in the lives of my various, dozens and hundreds of writer friends, is this. If you can imagine a universe in which you're a published author, in which you make a book, and one day it's somewhere on a shelf, then that universe, that life is totally possible. And the question as to how do you get to that place is as varied as there are people in the world, but there are some steps you can take that apply to most of us. And so first, it is reading as much as possible. When you read books, and I'm sure if you are a writer person, if you are a writer at heart, you love to read stories. This is beneficial because on the one hand, you see what you love about storytelling. For me, I love great characters. I love great dialogue. I love beautiful metaphors. That's what I'm into. When I read those kind of books, I'm energized by it. But you also see what you don't like. I read books sometimes that are like very generic and flatly written on purpose because it's designed to be more plot oriented. And, that makes me go, I like this story, but I could have done better. If you have that feeling, that's an honest feeling, that's an authentic feeling that you can lean into. I also encourage all of you out there who are interested in being writers, and even if you're an established writer, to take the time to educate yourself. I got my start in part by taking independent classes around New Orleans. There's a teacher I had years ago named James Nolan who gave weekly classes out of Loyola University back in the late 2000s, and it changed my life to be in those classes. It showed me what was possible. I learned a lot. He was very encouraging to me as a new writer. Again, I wasn't that young. I was like 30 years old. So you do that. You can take classes at universities. You can take classes in your community that organizations do. You can take online classes. You can find craft in craft books. There's a lot of great books out there that are great craft books. And I guess thirdly, start writing. Just write for yourself. Sit down and write a page. If you want to do stories, write a flash story. Forget writing that epic, that 3-volume tome about your family history or about, these many generations of some family. Just take off a small bite that you can chew. So write a story that's 4 pages long. Start fast, start in the middle, and go for it and see where it goes. And your main tasks are several, which is commit to the bit, make it feel honest and authentic, be passionate on the page. Like let the voice feel like it's being told to somebody that's really interested, that you're being encouraged to tell this story. And most importantly, and I say this in many contexts, just have a good time, baby. Writing should not be a painful endeavor. You should feel energized by it. I have said in my essays, here on Substack, I have said it in the podcast many times. I'm saying it here today in my first video, that when I'm asked, how do I stay motivated to write? How do I get through stories that are difficult to tell? If I get writer's block, how do I keep going? That's really the answer. I ask myself, what would make this more of an enjoyable experience for me, the writer? And so that means making the story funnier, if that means making my character a little bit more interesting, if it means going to places that I wouldn't have expected in an early draft, go to that place, baby. Just go there and see how it feels. And what happens is that when you share the work with your friends and people you respect, as you're trying to make it what it can be, they will tell you how you're doing. And if you are energized and passionate and obsessed about what you're writing, they will feel it on the page. So I guess in closing, what I'll say here, ending my first video, is this. As a writer, I have seen in my own life, and I have seen it time and time again with amateur writers, with new writers, that you can walk this hero's journey from somebody who wishes they had a story or an essay or a screenplay or a book to somebody who has exactly that thing in the world. Take small steps. Don't beat yourself up. No negative self-talk. No shame, no guilt. Have a good time. You can do it. I believe in you. We believe in you because we want your stories. So on that note, this has been Maurice Carlos Ruffin's Sitting in Silence. As a bit of housekeeping, I always forget this part of it. Whatever feeds you're seeing this on, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcast, the Substack app, be sure to like it because, as you know, when you like things, it's more visible in the various feeds. If you like what I've said today, then please go ahead and become a follower of Sitting in Silence or me, Maurice Carlos Ruffin. You can subscribe to my feed. I have, at this point, I think like 3,800 subscribers. And also, for those of you who want to help keep the lights on here, because I have to decide how to allocate my time, become a patron. That's right. There is a patron link you can find on the website. And I really appreciate those. There are now many of you out there who have been very supportive in this project, which I think ultimately is going to lead me writing a book about craft and about storytelling and about motivation at some point. So you've been very helpful as sort of Kickstarter / GoFundMe type people here. So there's that. Also, if you want to see me in person, I'm actually wrapping up my travels for the year, but at some point in September, I will be in New York City giving a series of presentations, probably in the second or third week of that month, at NYU and other locations as well. So look me up. You can find me, of course, on Substack. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook. I'm also on Blue Sky sometimes as well. Other than that, I'm out here in the world. All right, folks. Thanks for your time. Thanks for indulging this experiment that I'm trying today. I am your friendly neighborhood host, Maurice Carlos Ruffin, and I believe in you. Love you. Toodles.